the recipes or the dishes of the Jews, as Joyce Goldstein put it, show the resiliency throughout history of the Jews. Jews came to Italy over 2,000 years ago. We know for certain that they came with the Maccabees as um, ambassadors. However, we believe that they were there even before, possibly with the fall of Alexander the Great's empire. The cuisine of the Jews was cucina povera, the poor cuisine, because Jews were not allowed often the rich people's what other people were eating. Also, they adapted due to laws and restrictions. They adapted non-kosher recipes to serve their own needs. So that is a picture of the Sea of Halakha. And they also were often traders. So they brought the foods and customs from wherever they came. And the traditional recipes and food sources like apricots and artichokes, and even lemons from the Middle East. So Jews originally came to I thought, our first technical glitch of the evening. Sorry, thank you for bearing with me. Jews came to the middle portion with Rome originally, and then moved south. The recipes and the dishes tell the story of vanquished worlds, and how do you know, but have moved into the parlance of what we call Italian cuisine. I showed the map because until recently, there wasn't an Italy as we consider it. It was a bunch of city states, and each city state and region had its own cuisine, and foreign food was something not from, would we say, Thai food or Chinese food or sushi. Still today, if you're eating Roman food in Venice, that is considered foreign food. When you want to visit Italy, I always recommend eat of the region where you're visiting. Drink the wine of the region you're visiting in at the same time, because you don't want to have the best food will always be the nonna, which is grandmother, or the person who lives and has pride in their region. However, Jewish food has, because Jews were traditionally traders and would go from region or country to country, some of their recipes made it throughout Italy, and you can know the names by how the recipe is called. Alla Ibreca, alla Judea, alla Grecia, from Jerusalem, etc. When I said that Jews were not allowed to eat some of the foods of the original populace, this is due to the sumptuary laws. The sumptuary laws were against luxury and ostentation, and they didn't want these are laws that were, again, by the various city states, but particularly in Rome, where they didn't want Jews to integrate with the larger populace, but also they wouldn't, it helped keep the Jews under thumb, as it were. Many of the notable Jewish Roman dishes originate from the Ghetto period. The Ghetto period in Rome started with the cum nimbus absurdum. I love that term. And so I have a copy of it here. That's the original papal bull of making into the ghetto of Rome, although the Rome didn't have the first ghetto. The first ghetto is of Venice, and I will talk about that at my next lecture. Of course, the other reason that the Jews have their own Italian cuisine is because of the laws of kashrut. Originally, each community would have their own ways of dealing with kashrut, and in fact, Milan didn't agree with Rome, and what was kosher and what was not kind of blurred. Nowadays, it's a worldwide worldwide issue, whose picture do you have? And in fact, recently, and we're talking in 2019, there was the Italian-Israel artichoke war. As many of you may be familiar, artichokes or kartoffel is a very Jewish dish. But Israel's chief rabbinate got some artichokes that didn't happen to be Italian. They were frozen and from someplace else, and they had bugs in them. And therefore, the Beit Din of the chief Israeli rabbinate said, you can't make kartoffel, they're not kosher because it had bugs. This, of course, isn't acceptable to any Italian. So there became the back and forth where the Rabbi Umberto Piperno, who was of Rome, said there is no Pope, talking about the Israeli rabbinate, and that Jewish Romans know how to inspect the artichoke much better than Israeli rabbis. And the chief rabbi, Senya of Italy, actually went on TV and responded and said, because and the reason he said we are the people of the artichoke, not only the people of the Holocaust, is because so much, especially in Italy, goes on with remembering the Holocaust and the Shoah. And that he wanted to remind people that Jewish cooking is part of Italian cooking. So I thought Jews are very much alive and kicking in Italy and very proud of their heritage. So that gets to the carciofi. And there are many, many ways of making carciofi or artichokes in Italy, but the quintessential way is the fried one. And so that you can see a little picture of that. In fact, in Rome, the Jews were known to be the frigitori. They were the street vendors. And during the day when the ghetto doors were open, many people who were not Jewish would come for the succulent dishes of the Roman. The carciofi al Judea is a crispy chrysanthemum when it's fully fried. It's a hard dish. My mother-in-law, which I didn't explain to those who don't know about me, my mother-in-law was Lael Hazan, who was considered the doyen of Italian cooking and wrote many books and articles and was quite well known for her bringing Italian food to America of the kind of food that Italians were eating then. I show this picture because this is Rome, and this is the show when the largest group or the first large group of Jews came to Italy. They came after the fall of the temple with Titus. This is known as the Arch of Titus. And it was destroyed, but the temple was destroyed, and the Romans brought back all of the artifacts to Rome to show how they had conquered. But the arch was actually built by Domitian, not Titus, and it was he built it as a symbol of a unified empire. It was a part of a practice of the time called evocation deorum, the calling out of the gods. And he wanted to show that the gods had forsaken the Jews in favor of Rome. For many centuries, Jews never would walk under the arch. However, the Jews of Rome decided to walk back in 1948, hundreds of Holocaust survivors carrying signs of support for the new state of Israel walked backwards under the arch, symbolizing the return of the Jewish people to the homeland. So since then, Jews do walk under the arch. So the first Jewish foods that we know of is a fermented fish sauce, which does not sound good, but think of soy sauce. It's a savory sauce, and it was popular all over Rome. But it was made of a lot of different kinds of fish. However, in Pompeii, and that is a picture of Pompeii, they found a garum costume, which is pure garum. And that was only garum that was made with fish with scales. So we don't know if it was made for Jews. Was it for clientele other than Jews? Because the cult of ISIS, or there were other cults that did keep some of those laws and resided in the area, which is in Campania. But it's an interesting thought, and to understand that the Jewish population had grown so big that the factories were making kosher food even to 2,000 years ago. So the Jews were in Rome and then expanded into southern Italy. But Rome, of course, is where we think of great delicacies. And so it's the oldest and poorest cooking in Rome, but it's also considered the tastiest because the Jews of Rome would eat lettuce, which and other vegetables that most of the populace would try not to eat. I put up a menu of one of the kosher restaurants in Rome, and of course it begins with the Jewish artichoke, the carciofi, but it also has different meats. The stracotto. Stracotto means really overcooked meat because it was not a good cut of meat, and it was. But it had to be braised for days. And it's, of course, now delicious and something we all want. It's probably the beginning of brisket. And this menu goes down to the frito di cervello, which is brains, because Jews would eat offal, which the regular populace at that time did not. One of the Jewish dishes of Rome is the supli al telefono, or sorpresa, which is surprise. And it's a little, it's kind of like an arancini if you know Sicilian cooking. And so I have a picture if you don't. And inside is a surprise. And now it's of mozzarella, which is why it's called telefono, because it looks like the old cords. My children would not know what a telephone cord would look like. I don't know if your children or grandchildren would. And it has a surprise within, and even, of course, the Pope likes it. But in the past, offal was used as the surprise. Another famous Roman dish is concha, which is what happens when you have an abundance of produce, but you want to preserve it because you don't know what's around the corner. The Jews of Rome fried it and then marinated it in vinegar. This was a dish brought to Rome by the Sephardic population. In other parts of Italy, you'll find it with different vegetables, but in Rome, it's with zucchini. This is the Grand Synagogue in Rome, and the dish is alciotti con l'endiva, which is savory baked layers of endive, or they'll use escarole, and anchovies, because again, anchovies were a fish that was a trash fish. Everyone could get them. You'll have chickpeas with bits of meat from the knuckle, the cecchicoi pennelli. My Italian, I understand, but my accent is not. My husband is Italian, so I don't speak in Italian to him. You can't argue as well. And then, of course, pizza ibraica, which is not a pizza. It's a dessert, and with sweets in it. Going south of Rome, there's pizza scima. Sorry about that. It's from Abruzzo. Baking is not an Italian thing for the home cook. Baking, you would usually go to a baker in the center of your town, and they would bake for you. So to have a hearth, you would have it in the open, especially if you were poor. And so the picture is of a wood fire hearth that's outside of a country home. The silly pizza, Shima, is a very dialect. It actually means idiot's pizza, but they were nice in the translation. And that brings us, keeping going south, where were the Jews? There was a lot of Jewish trade in Sicily, especially prior to the expulsion. Um, it was a growth community. And in fact, the bottom picture is of the oldest mikveh in Sicily. Unfortunately, there is not a large Jewish community now in Sicily. You'll still see streets like the one to the right that indicated there were Jews there, but there is trying to be a rebirth. And the upper picture is in Palermo of a defunct church that now is being renovated to house a congregation of Jews. However, the cuisine that the Jews brought to Sicily, because Sicily is really, people from Sicily often will always say they're Sicilian. They may not say they're Italian because Sicily is a country and a cuisine unto itself. Its cuisine is savory, it's sweet and sour. But the Jews were one of the people to bring the eggplant and to try the cuisine, especially of the New World, because the kingdom of Naples and Sicily allowed Jews to stay there longer. There were a lot of influx of Sephardim from Spain. And so they brought their flavors with them. And one of the things they brought was the eggplant as well as peppers. And the Sicilian caponata is a dish that could be made prior to Shabbat and then served at room temperature. And so adding the sweet and sours of pine nuts and currants. So they brought the flavors and you could taste and enjoy Shabbos. Another source of dessert that's very well known as Sicilian is the cassola, which is an ancestor of a cheesecake, has made its way to general Italian Sicilian cooking. Of course, there's pasta. Now I have to, this is my husband. I'm a little biased. I think he's cute. This is him prior to our girls becoming teenagers when his hair was still black. It's now gray. But my husband's known as a aficionado and written a couple books on pasta. So I have to show. But pasta, fresh made pasta, is often thought to have originated with Marco Polo. That's not true. That is a 1938 American marketing scam, but it has, we all know it. What we pretty much believe is that it probably started in China at some point because we have a bowl from 2400 before Common Era from China. But we also are aware of it being, there was something called Itria, and that came through Sicily. It was mentioned in the Talmud, and that in the 3rd century in Palestine, there were rabbinical academies who were discussing the status of the dough, because for those who are bakers and keep kosher, you'll know that you make a little bit of the dough for your challah for trium, for an offering. Well, what about for pasta? Do you have to take an offering or not? That's still a bit, depends which rabbi you decide to follow, whether you do or not. Most people do not. We know that Rashi in the 12th century was talking about vermicelli, which is possibly vermicelli. So it's wonderful to see the history of the noodles. Also, and I have the quote because this is still today in common language, vesti da turco e mangia de ebreo, that you should dress like a Turk because everything at that time, Constantinople was very elegant, and but eat like an ebreo because the foods of the Jews were so good. Moving around Italy, we get to Ancona, which is on the Adriatic coast. It was a papal state. And they had their own pasta because pasta, again, all the sauces, all the kinds of pasta, everything very regional. And Ancona was known for a pasta that you could eat on Pesach. I want to try this one. I've not tried that. But it's called sfoglietti or foglietti, and it's a pasta for Passover. It actually doesn't look that, I looked at the recipe, it doesn't look wonderful, but hey, the possibility is good. Another food that Ancona was very well known for is a particularly rich matzah that the Jews of Venice so adored they spared no expense to import. The picture is the ark in the Ancona, as well as and the synagogue. I love the symbology in the silver. And the plaza is unfortunately a memorial. Um, if you remember your history of Simon of Trent, or this was a blood libel, and one of the first blood libels of uh, it happening in the Papal States in the Italian area. And in Ancona, they burned 25 people. This became a very big issue because this was happening at a time when there was an influx of Spanish Jews, and the Jews were talking about boycotting. They actually did boycott it, Ancona and a port, to show strength and to say we don't want this to happen anymore. The Jews decided to finally back down because it was hurting the Jews of Ancona, the boycott, too much. But it was the first instance of true solidarity within a larger Jewish community to try and do something about what was happening to our fellow religious partners. Other cities and city states have their own pastas. In Mantova, there is a pasta filled with pumpkin. And it's one of my favorite pasta. It's a tortelli. And the pumpkin, of course, is a new world brought to the new by the Spanish. And Jews included the squash in their Yom Kippur breakfast menus, as well as now as the filling for Mantova. Mantova was owned by the Gonzaga family and is really a place that's not on many um, tourist itineraries, and I do highly suggest it. The picture is of the Norsa synagogue, which still exists. The first mention of pasta is also from Mantova by the writings of Columnus ben Columnus, and he wrote about that specific pasta. My husband can teach it to you. We teach how to make it in our course. Just an aside. Now, this is a pasta my husband does not approve of. The Jews get the distinguished of creating the first cold pastas. It's not his thing. Let's just put it at that. And it's also very hard to find a picture of. This was for Shabbat. One of the more famous cold pasta dishes is the pasta con bagna bruscia, which is much like the Greek dish with lemon. Before lemons were cultivated, it was made with unripe grapes, which doesn't sound good at all. Etrogs Jews used lemons before everybody else because they were creating and breeding etrogs for Sukkot. And so they created the dish to use to celebrate Sukkot. The picture is the Florence synagogue because I liked it. And Shabbat. One of my favorite cities and one of my favorite Jewish Italian cuisine authors comes from this marvelous city called Pitignano. I'll ask if anyone has been there, but I highly recommend it. It is a wonderful mountain, as you can see by my picture, town. It just hugs this mountain. What's notable about this city, it really became a Jewish city because it's at the end of Lazio, which is the Roman area, and the beginning of Tuscany. So depending if the Medici were pro-Jews, they owned the city. And then when the Medici didn't like the Jews, it went back to Lazio and the Papal States. So it kept on flip-flopping, which helped it be a good place for the Jews to be that was steady and they could not be afraid of always living there. Unfortunately, after the Holocaust, it's really not a viable community anymore, but the synagogue is open. And if you have a chance, it's a wonderful destination. Um, Etta Macklin's classic book is The Classic Cuisine of the Italian Jews. And one of the recipe that I enjoy of her pasta recipes shows the sense of humor the Jews used in naming and creating their dishes, because they used a lot of symbology. This one is Rotto del Faraone, which is the Pharaoh's wheels. And it's baked in a circle to resemble the wheels of the Pharaoh's chariots. The noodles are supposed to show the waves of the seas. Pine nuts are Egyptian horses, and raisins or meatballs are the warriors being submerged. So you probably have to have somebody explain it, but there's a lot of different foods that have the symbology and why they came together. Baccalà is ubiquitous all throughout Italy, or actually the Catholic world. There's a wonderful book on cod, if you are interested in eating about food. Cod is not a Mediterranean fish, but it is a very hearty fish that, when it's salted, becomes easily preserved. And it's at that time, there was a lot of it. And so it was very able to eat, to be used for even the poor populace. The Jewish version of the baccalà is a fried version, of course, because Jews, Italian food, everything is fried. The baccalà is is soaked to remove the salt, and then the fillet is deep fried. Try it sometime, it's good. The Jewish cuisine did make it to it influenced the larger population. We had a couple of the celebrity chefs, most notably Bartolomeo Scapi, who was the chef for two popes, and he also wrote in 1570 the first real cookbook. In fact, he was the one to create the term that we use of pasta. Before that, pasta hadn't been in general use. He wrote that the liver of the geese raised by the Jews was considered the best, and he, of course, declared Parmigiano Reggiano the best cheese on earth, because Italians are noted for their humility. Speaking of Parmigiano, that was my kids, long time ago. There is, of course, because if there are two Jews, we have to have three opinions, the issue of, is Parmigiano Reggiano kosher? So in the 15th century, Parmigiano Reggiano by Milan was considered kosher. There are Talmudic codes that talk about how to make kosher rennet, and that it has to be dried. It has to come from an animal that was a kosher animal, and then the rennet has to be reactivated. It's a very thorough laws. But some Jews, now that we're in a modern time, didn't believe that would be that's not worldwide accepted. So some people created a microbial rennet. Rennet, by the way, I apologize for those who might not know how to make cheese. Rennet is the enzyme that is used to coagulate cheese and make pretty much all cheeses, hard cheeses. So there's a microbial, a vegan rennet, shall we say, but the consortia, or the group of Parmigiano Reggiano makers, don't believe that microbial rennet makes Parmigiano Reggiano, so you can't have the stamp of the consortia. So that's called Grana Padano, but that's another inside political fight. So even though there are rabbis, and in fact, the picture I originally showed you of the rabbi was from long ago, and he was making sure that everything was kosher of the Parmigiano Reggiano, only recently, like last year, 2019, has there been a worldwide hechsher for Parmigiano Reggiano, and you can even find it at Zabar's, the important places. As I had mentioned before, goose salami and goose prosciutto took the place Jews created goose for both pourboire, but also to take place of prosciutto, which is a welcome delicacy in Italy, but the Jews couldn't eat it. So they found a different way. And so the raising of geese and creating the prosciutto became a Jewish activity. The Dukes of Savoy in Piedmont and then Milan and Lombardy invited Jews in, especially after the expulsion, because they wanted a learned class and they wanted manufacturers, and the Jews became the textile workers. And there are these marvelous, glorious, beautiful, very Baroque, as you can see, little shuls that have unfortunately no communities left, but they're pinpointed in Piedmont especially. So this is the salame d'orca, the goose salumi. As you can see, it looks like a regular prosciutto, and even the salumi is in a casing, a special casing that makes it round, like a pig salumi, and they use it for anything they might use another prosciutto for. There's even the festa de orca, so you can see in the top with their in the regalia. That was a pre-COVID picture. Jews were early adopters, in this case, the early adopters of the New World, and especially tomatoes. Tomatoes were brought to Italy and planted as ornamental, but they were thought to be poisonous. One of the first recipes we know of as an Italian recipe is from Ferrara, of the potatoes with tomatoes. In fact, even in 1692, Naples, where you think of pizza with always a tomato sauce, there was only one recipe. However, now, of course, we have the pizza margherita, which is everywhere in the world. I don't have a transition for this. This is Venice, but I couldn't continue Jewish cooking without talking about Venice. Venice is the first and oldest ghetto in Italy. And what's interesting is the Ghetto Vecchio is the newer ghetto, where the Ghetto Nuovo is the older ghetto, because ghetto means foundry. It does not mean a place to confine people. The Jews of the ghetto different groups went at different times, because there was an influx of Jews, and different Jews were allowed to live in Venice at different times. So you have a Sephardi, you have a Tedeschi or German Jews coming, and you have, of course, the Israelite, the people who were there probably since Roman times. Each built their own synagogue, and each had their own cooking. And that's brought some wonderful foods today. One of the most traditional dishes, the sarde and sour, which is a sweet and sour. In Venice, it's sweet and sour sardines, but it can be made with other kinds of fish. The bottom left is a picture of spinach, but it's spinach testines, heads of spinach, because it's the least wanted part. The middle picture is risotto alla Milanese, which you would think, wait a minute, isn't that from Milan? But saffron was brought by the Venetian traders, and by the Jewish Venetian traders first, and then it made its way to Milan. The cookies, the little kind of backwards S, are a special they're called empanada. There's from originally sort of a Spanish, but it's a Venetian interpretation. They're filled with almonds, and they're made for Purim. And they're, of course, in the ghetto itself, there are still bakeries, and it's a lively ghetto, mostly for the tourist trade, because Venice is too expensive for most people to live in. But you can taste a lot of the Jewish delicacies. Of course, keeping with the sense of humor of the Jews, Many of the desserts have symbols, including the safrata, which is the dessert of eviction. It's very sweet, but it's made to look like sticks used by landlords and the enemies of the Jews. This is Gam Gam. It's a very famous old kosher restaurant in the ghetto. I can't attest recently for the food. I think they have a new person. So, getting to what other foods were imported by the Jews is one of the questions of coffee, which I thought was a very interesting discovery. Of course, you know that coffee was discovered by the Ethiopians, but the first person to own a coffee shop was in Livorno, which is on the Mediterranean Gulf of Italy. Livorno itself was created by the Medici, so that they could have they, they really created it as a free port, and it became a mecca for Jews all over to live and work. And in fact, there's even a somewhat, it's its own dialect of Hebrew, Italian, Livorno dialect. It was a very, very large population. Um, but coffee and coffee houses became very, very well known and enjoyed. And of course, then you had to have laws making it not quite as fun. So you can't have gambling, and in Verona, they didn't even allow women in the coffee houses. Another wonderful invention, shall we say, that came through Livorno was chocolate to Italy. At first, it was a result of trade with Amsterdam, but made its way from both the Middle East and Amsterdam, and then became a huge trade in Italy, and infused a lot of foods with the savory. We're talking cocoa, not sugar chocolates. However, today we now consider the Livorno to Florence, the Fipili, the chocolate valley. And it's home to some of the Amadei and some of the big name chocolate and best chocolatiers in the world. Although chocolate and coffee were wonderful foods, most of the Jews were not eating the rich foods. They were stretching the budget. So they often would try and use fish as an accent because the vegetables themselves were what they could get. Jewish dishes show how scrap products can be transformed. Cephala in umido is the gray mullet with a celery, tomato sauce, and pepper. You may have heard of botarga, which is the mullet roe. We in Sarasota especially think of mullet as it's not something we eat. Ironically, up in Bradenton, if you've been to the Starfish Market, they take the mullet roe because it's very prized in Italy, and to make a botarga, which is a preserved roe that is shaved onto pasta or used as to eating. So it's interesting that the botarga for Italy and also in Japan come from our own waters here in the Gulf Coast. Another favorite dish is polenta with anchovy fritters. How to make something savory of something that many people would consider an inexpensive fish. And of course, ubiquitous different kinds of cakes and fish balls, etc., are in Jewish cooking. The Jews, oh, that was an interesting. I love when I get techie and don't even know it. The vegetables were big, and chicory. One of the most prized chicory is the radicchio, and radicchio tarviso is a wonderful, from Vicenza, sorry, is probably the most prized. It curls, and it's both sweet and a little bitter at the same time. And that's me in Treviso. Treviso is a marvelous city that, again, highly recommend seeing if you have a chance. Of course, how could I speak of Italian cooking without talking, Jewish cooking without talking about various Shabbat foods? Many of them were meals in one pot or things that could be used without for Shabbat luncheons. This is a meatloaf with veal. There's many Shabbat fish dishes. So you have the soar, but you also have poached and then served with either a nut sauce or a green sauce so that it would keep for Shabbat. High holy days, you had symbolic foods, beets to beat out the bad year, jujule, which are what we would consider crab apples, things of little value, dishes of wheat and corn to talk about things for the new year, and no foods with vinegar or lemon because you don't want anything with sour or anything that would be harsh and bitter for the New Year's. Yom Kippur, a last meal was always substantial, but you didn't want to have spice. First of all, how are you going to deal with that on your stomach? But a lot of squash, but you also didn't want, this is a time of mourning, so you don't want to have foods that are wealthy and happy. Sukkot, you have the chimbale, sweets and breads. There are so many foods. And I do want to talk about time, but the so you can make a kosher beef. The top Seder plate is from it's from the Emilia-Romagna area, and it's from the 16th century. There's an Italian haroset, but it is a Middle Eastern, and of course, lots of kinds of different tartufi, which are the little chocolate balls. One of the things you won't find is chicken soup, because as one of the nonnas would say, Italian chickens are too thin. They're not fat enough for chicken soup. And now Italian Jews never had the sweet manischewitz that we have in America. They have wine that they would consider drinkable, and there are lots of kosher wines. In fact, there's even a kosher Barolo from Italy. That's possible. So I want to make sure that I leave time for questions. And so I'm happy to unmute everyone and stop sharing and ask away. Oh, I see the Latanzi restaurant in the ghetto. I don't know that restaurant. We tend to eat at very small restaurants. When my husband and I go, we go about twice a year. That's when we have our cooking school in Italy. But I haven't had the one. I'd be happy if you want to unmute and ask questions, and and share your experiences. Jay?
Yes.
Yes?
Okay. There's a Latanzi restaurant on Restaurant Row in New York City that after 8 o'clock does recipes from the ghetto in Rome and does a Passover meal, not necessarily kosher, but it does a Passover meal where they make matzah that is drizzled with olive oil, and you can buy the matzah when you leave the restaurant to take home with you. It is unbelievable.
Oh, well, that's good to know. I've not been there. Thanks for letting us know. Susan, I love your background that you have an Italian restaurant. Grazie.
Prego. It's from Sicily.
Ah, fantastic. Oh, Sicilian gelato is a thing to experience. You have to go there. It's worth a visit just for the gelato.
What do they call the rum cakes that we got there that were delicious?
Oh dear. I'll have to ask my husband.
Okay. Full of rum and so good. Oh, so good.
So drunk early in the morning.
The thing, it's like Neapolitan coffee, just tastes different. And part of it is because of the water. And you have to go to try it. It's hard. Any other questions I can answer? Oh, a quiet group. I hope I made you hungry.
I
Oh,
have
most of you.
another question.
Yeah.
It's Susan here. I have another question. There is a Jewish pastry that I think is for Rosh Hashanah. That's little dough balls that you put sugar on and things, and it's in a triangular shape. But there's also an Italian pastry like that.
Let me see if I can get my husband in there. I'm not familiar, and my husband doesn't like to bake. So, um, I I will have to ask him. And actually, that does bring. I'm going to put in the chat, but I can be reached Lael, Lael, at Gracious Getaways. I am happy to. I have a lot of contacts, and there is a huge repertoire of Jewish cuisine. So if I'm not familiar, I'm happy to
I will tell you.
find it. I also have a lot of these recipes that we discussed, if there's anything of interest, as well as if you are interested in further research, I have a repertoire, and I'm happy to share with you some of the articles and books that I did some research. Of course, I'm fortunate to go twice a year, so and we have a lot of contacts. I believe Janet has a question.
I don't have a question. I wanted to make a comment. In the year 2005, I took a trip to Venice and had a cooking class with Marcella in her apartment. And she had two men on either side of her with white gloves and white coats, handing her the things that she needed to make the dishes. The table was set up in front of the elevator. When you come out of the elevator into her apartment, it was this grand, glorious old apartment, and we watched her make all the dishes, and then she served our group dinner in her dining room. It was one of the most glorious, gracious evenings that I've ever spent. And she took us to the market that morning, and we bought artichokes, and she was wearing a mink hat and a mink coat, and she was absolutely marvelous. I'm trying to think what else I remember. Her dishes. She had the most gorgeous dishes, which turned out to be mine. It was a Florentine pattern dish. I don't know if you know those dishes. I own those, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And the chandeliers in all of her rooms were magnificent. And it was a most gracious experience. I had no idea that she was Jewish. I had no idea that she lived in Sarasota. So seeing you here today is a reunion for me, and a thrill to see you here and to be talking about these wonderful Jewish dishes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
I
so much.
appreciate it. My mother-in-law was extraordinary, and I'm fortunate. She unfortunately passed 7 years ago. My father-in-law, Victor, is still here, and very much so. He, as he puts it, is in his 93rd year. Um, so for Sarasota, that's fairly middle age, and going strong, and we eat very well. And he's still collecting wine, so there's a lot to go through, and I expect a lot more food and wine. Frank Levy, I believe you had a question, or maybe not. I'm happy to answer any other questions. Oh, yes. Hello.
Lael,
Yes.
this was most enjoyable. I want
I'm sorry.
to tell you, there is a gelato place called the Gelateria del Teatro, which has the world's finest gelato. And you have to stand in line for miles and miles, but it's worth every minute of the wait to get into this place. If anybody wants the address, I'll send it to them. But it is the best in the world. It's famous, and it's a well-kept secret. You find it in some guidebooks and not others.
Well, please tell
So
me.
I'm happy to share this.
So, if any of you do go to Venice, Italy, the Cipriani Hotel is very famous for their chocolate gelato. And they're very famous for not sharing the recipe, which my mother-in-law put in her book 25 years ago. So if you want to make your own extraordinary gelato, since right now we can't travel to Venice, I highly recommend, it's in Essentials. or you can email me if you want the recipe. But it is a fabulous, there are a few secret touches that make it just so good. But gelato is a thing of beauty that unfortunately is ethereal.
Right.
Frank, I believe you might have a question. Yes, the tag lock. I had the picture. I was just rushing so that I wanted to make sure that I was able to get questions. Hey, yes.
We rented an apartment outside of Florence, and we found the fruits and vegetables extraordinary. And we have a friend who loves to cook. And this time when he came back from Italy, he brought seeds from the little tomatoes to plant here because he felt he could never get that delicious tomato in the States. Do you find that the fruits and vegetables are much better than what we're getting here?
Oh, no question. But everything really is terroir. So, but things still have flavor there. In fact, if you go to a market, and the open air markets are really worth, and go in the morning for the open air markets. It's a wonderful tour of the way things could be. Now, in Italy, you're not allowed to touch anything in an open air market. The proprietor will tell you. And in fact, you can point to something, but if the proprietor thinks there's something better, the proprietor will give you that. In fact, Giuliano, we were living in Bologna for a time, and he went to buy things for at the market, and the person owning the stand was asking him the recipe, and Giuliano told him. The guy at the stand said, "Well, you need celery for that." And Giuliano, my husband, said, "No, my recipe doesn't call for celery, so I'm not buying it," because, of course, this is how you talk to your grocer. And guess what was in his bag when we got home? The celery. Guess who didn't use the celery? My husband. So, can you go back to that guy and tell him you didn't use the celery, though? I'm not so sure.
Hello. The phone was ringing. I had to mute myself. So, this is Frank Levy. Baklava I had in Lisbon. Did that travel, from the Spanish type people to Italy, or what?
Well, actually, baklava traveled first from the Middle East. Remember, Cairo and Alexandria had huge Jewish populations. And so you had a lot of Middle Eastern movement into especially southern Italy, prior to what we know as the Renaissance. We often think of when we think of Jewish Italian, we think of the Renaissance onward. But there were some of the dishes that were brought from the Middle East in the traveling that were there prior to the Sephardic expulsion. But yes, the Spanish Jews brought a lot of different recipes. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I will be back to talk about the great Jewish personalities, of which I won't be able to cover everybody, but I'll pinpoint some fun ones and perhaps some that you haven't heard of. And so I want to thank you for joining me. Al, I believe you had a comment before.
Yes, we certainly want to thank you for a wonderful presentation tonight. I think we've gained about 3 to 5 pounds through this presentation, but it was absolutely delicious.
May they all be virtual.
Yeah, well, that's I still feel heavier as a result. So thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and job well done. And we can't wait for your next presentation in a couple of weeks.
I look forward to seeing whoever is interested on the 23rd of March. Have a great evening.
Mille grazie.
Prego.
Ci vediamo. Ci vediamo presto.
A presto. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.